Hey, everybody, we're back again today. Today, we decided we want to talk about, some of the qualities that we see in healthy relationships, whether it's behaviors or, um, you know, communication styles. And if we have enough time, we'll kind of move into parenting qualities, parenting programs that we recommend, like, dislike, characteristics of them. And so we'll go from there. So, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you, Jen, when you think of meeting with a couple?
I like to look to see if the words and actions match. I feel a lot of times people say, I love you, but then they turn around and are very quick to be very mean, judgmental, critical. And to me, that's not love. I feel like that's a violation of your boundaries if you're giving someone unwanted feedback, criticism, advice, whatever. And if you're saying, I love you, but then turning around and telling people that there's something wrong with them, we either have to look at the communication or how people show and receive love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, really helping them recognize, they may really feel I love you towards a person, but when behavior doesn't demonstrate that, it's hard for the other person to say, hey, that's loving.
Yep. And I
So,
believe, when you grow up, we are conditioned to, believe what love is. And if you've had abuse, if you've had emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, we've learned that love and pain can go together. So
yeah,
oftentimes when I see really, people coming in a relationship, I like to look at, what was it like for you growing up? How was love shown?
yes,
Did people say I love you and then punched you or slapped you?
right.
Because what
Yeah,
happens then is we learn that love can go together with pain and abuse, and
mhm.
that becomes
It's
so
normalized.
normalized.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all normal within the context of our own lives, but normal isn't always effective. The goal is to
Exactly.
learn how to be effective, not
Yeah.
more normal.
I read
Absolutely.
something, somebody had wrote something like, if you've learned to lick, if you've been fed love on a serrated knife, you've learned that love can hurt you, versus being
Right.
fed love on a spoon.
Yeah.
Spoons don't hurt you, knives do.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. That's cool. Yeah, the
Yeah.
first thing I look for in a couple is their accountability. If they don't have accountability, that means, accountability being um, there's the individual is able to look at part of some behavior or, some quality and be able to say, I recognize I do that, some ownership over the problem. Because if they don't have accountability, the first thing I work towards is addressing usually their own trauma history that has taught them it's not okay to be vulnerable, because without that vulnerability, you don't build trust in a relationship and learn to really be yourself in a relationship. So, my first step is usually accountability and communication style. I use Gottman method, which is addresses the four characteristics of um, communication that can predict divorce at the level of 93%: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So I really want every couple to, every individual in that relationship to recognize, when do I do this? Because if as I'm explaining what those are, if they're sitting there thinking you do that, then there's nothing they can do about that. But if they listen to those behaviors and they say, I recognize I do that, then all of a sudden they have something they can do to help improve the relationship, not just wait for the other person to fix the problems because they're the problem.
Right. And I think we can take that even further back when you're dating somebody, the accountability, right?
Yes.
How do you see if someone's accountable? When you first start dating, how do they talk about their other partners? How do they talk
Yes.
about mistakes? How do they talk about other people? Are they always the victim? Are
They're
they
to
always
blame.
the
That
one?
yes.
Yes. Are they always angry that something happened to them and they can't, look at themselves and see what their part in it is?
Yeah,
So, that accountability doesn't just start in marriage, it goes all the way back to when you begin
absolutely.
dating. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you grow up in a household where you're criticized a lot, or um, you live in a fear-based environment where you're going to get in trouble if you do anything, you really get conditioned not to take ownership over anything because you get in trouble for everything anyways.
Yep.
So why throw yourself under the bus? So you kind of learn not to demonstrate accountability. Plus, most of the time you have parents or caregivers that didn't demonstrate that. So where would you learn that if you were never exposed to it?
Exactly. Well, and the
So
same with lying, right? Like hiding of the truth, telling half truths.
yes,
Yeah, not telling people the whole story. You learn that from childhood because like you're right.
absolutely.
You're either in trouble for you telling the truth or you're in trouble for telling the lying for lying. So you either like just you learn to read the
Yeah,
room and try to like you put out a little bit of information to see how the other person's going to receive it. And
yeah,
then if you feel safe, you're able to tell the full story. But if you feel like, oh shit, this is going to get me in trouble. Oh shit, they're pissed off. I can already see. You
yeah,
learn to reel it in.
yeah. Well, and I think I mentioned that in one of our earlier podcasts, how, I was such a little liar when I was a kid because nobody in my life could handle the truth. If you admit to a lie, you might as well have admitted to murder. Didn't matter how big or little it was. It was just so overwhelmingly dramatic anytime there was a
Yes.
problem. And it wasn't just, my mom having a problem with it. Most of the time my mom was fairly understanding about things, but she would be criticized by her sister and her mom. So pretty soon I'm just being ganged up on by all three of them because my mom didn't have the ability to back down from her mom. So it was just like this whole gang against you. There was nothing in my young brain that said, oh, trust these people and admit to a mistake. It was save your ass from.
Yes. I had the same thing. My brother was very abusive to me, very mean. He would always just, I'd walk in and he'd grab me and he'd hit me, and he was always just unpredictable. So one day I fought back and I had this big, thick wooden candlestick and I whipped it at him and it hit him in the head and it cracked his head. And I took off and ran.
Right,
And everyone's like, why did you run? I'm like, because I knew what was going to happen. I would be the one in trouble. No one cared what he hit me
right.
first. So I
Yeah.
remember I took off. It didn't come home for like, I don't know, 7 hours. And my aunt calls me and my aunt's like, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, he hit me first. And she's like, well, you don't go hitting people with candlesticks. And I'm
Right.
like, I was in fight, flight, or freeze. I
Yeah.
felt like my life was in danger. I stood up for myself. And she held that position until she died 2 years ago. And on her
Oh, wow.
deathbed, her and I were talking about, I'm like, you've always sat there and you've excused poor behavior in other people. And I said, and you've gotten yourself into bad relationships because of that. And I always looked up to her thinking, wow, my aunt knows everything. And then I watched her in her, as I was an adult making these horrible choices. And then I was able to say, you know what? Everybody that sat there and told me I was wrong, they were wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
watching
And
them live their life.
interesting. Yeah. Interesting too, and I didn't learn this until I became a marriage and family therapist that, sometimes it's not the parents that are the abusers in relationships growing up. Sometimes it's a sibling. And, it wasn't until then that I realized that was the case with my sister. If my sister, because my sister was violent, if if she did something, it was unless it was just my mom around. My mom would advocate for who's being the asshole, against who's being the asshole. But if my grandma or my aunt were around, they were closer to my sister, and she could do no wrong in their eyes. And I think my mom was afraid of my sister for a long time. So
Wow.
she really, avoided her in a lot of ways and put up with her shit. So, and that's actually a person that in my life as an adult, I'm like, I don't need that in my life anymore.
Yep.
So it's really processing your own trauma and being able to make those distinctions between family and health.
Well, and that's okay too. We have a society that tells us, oh, it's family. You have to like, oh, religion and
Exactly.
society tells us. And I tell my
Yes.
clients, it doesn't matter who somebody is. They have no right to be hitting you, hurting you. And if, would you choose a friend that was like that to be in your
Right.
life? You have every right in the world to set boundaries. And if they don't follow them, they don't have to be in your life.
Yeah,
Because you think
absolutely.
about, yeah, you think about the
We're on the
roles
same
too,
page with
right?
that.
If you're abused by a sibling, a parent, right? And then you get into a relationship, we're emotionally stunted at the age that we were abused. So
Yes.
oftentimes when we are not being accountable with our partner, or we're lying to our partner, it's because all of a sudden now we feel emotionally like we're 7 years old and we're in trouble.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden this
Your body
person,
goes into fight, flight,
yeah,
freeze.
yes, we freeze up and we think we're, going to be in trouble. So all of a
Yeah.
sudden now that child brain takes over. We're showing up in adult clothes, feeling like a little tiny kid.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really hard to act like an adult and have a conversation
Yeah.
with your spouse when you're both feeling emotionally stunted.
Yeah. And to change that, you really have to learn to feel your emotions again so that you can interact with those experiences with different emotions in place in the present so that you teach your body how not to be hijacked
Yes.
anymore.
I
So,
ask my clients when they come in as couples, you see them sinking down. You kind of see them sinking into the couch, going
yeah,
into turtle mode. And
yeah.
I'm like, I always ask, how old are you feeling right now? And they're usually feeling like a child. And then I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to stretch your arms out. I want you to raise them up. I want you to bring some oxygen back, to your, get all the oxygen to your brain, open it up so you can breathe deeper, stand
Yeah,
up and shake it out. So that way
yeah,
we can get back to being an adult and
yeah,
having a conversation that's not making people uncomfortable.
yeah. Very cool research. And maybe we talked about it before. I don't remember, but um, with kids, I will ask them to stand like a superhero. And there's research that says within 3 minutes of changing your body posture, you can at a internal level be able to you can see um, oxytocin and cortisol or sorry uh, dopamine rise and adrenaline and cortisol lower in the in the blood system just by standing like a superhero. Or it originally started with research that said if you hold a pin in your mouth like this, it holds it in a frown. So you'll see an increase in adrenaline and cortisol. But if you hold it like this, which holds it in a smile, you see the opposite. So you get more dopamine and lower adrenaline cortisol.
Yeah.
So body posture, a lot of people talk a lot about breathing, like that is the number one. I just do my breathing. I do my breathing. There's other things that you can do and
Yes.
change your focus to one of your happiest memories. Imagine being there to the point that you can feel it, changing your body posture, even imagining your safe person in your life there with you as a backup for whatever you need to process can help lower those stress chemicals.
Yeah. I always tell my clients when they're coming in as couples, I tell them, I'm like, okay, so I want you to sit in Superman pose. And then I want you to remind yourself that you're surrounded by superheroes, that they've got
Yeah,
your back. And you
yeah,
even see it more like rising, like, okay, someone's got on my side because most people that come in haven't had a lot of healthy people on their side.
yeah,
Yeah, they haven't
absolutely.
seen healthy relationships. They haven't seen healthy communication, healthy conflict resolution. Most
Yeah,
of my clients have only seen anger,
yeah.
and that's
And
the
then you
only
bring that
emotion.
automatic response to an adult relationship. And then we wonder why those relationships don't work out because it's really two people that have all this baggage and they're asking their partner to carry the baggage instead of learning how to unpack it together.
Well, and their partner doesn't even know what they're carrying.
Exactly.
But yeah, because now all
Yeah.
of a sudden, when she's triggered, he's triggered, he's triggered, she's triggered,
Yeah.
and no longer are we living in the present. We're in the past, or we're
Yes.
worried about the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why, working with couples, I think it's so important to help them both know you're both 100% correct in how you look at any problem because the wiring in your brain from your existence before now has said this is the way to handle the problem, but your way of doing it isn't the other person's way of doing it. So you're both correct. Your job now is to suspend how you're correct and try to learn how your partner is also correct. And then you get to some middle ground with what do we want to do so that we're continually making movement on problems, not trying to solve them from one conversation. but continuing to make movement on problems. And if that doesn't work, it doesn't mean you failed at this conversation. It means there's more that we need to understand about it. So let's come back and continue to explore it until we realize it isn't a problem anymore. And that's when a problem is solved. When you look back and say, oh, that's not even a problem.
Yeah. Well,
It's
and
not
think
a
about
problem.
men, right? Men don't do life face to face. Men do life
Generally, yeah.
side by side, right? You don't see them sitting at the restaurants across from
Right.
each other having intimate conversations.
Yeah.
Women do, right? So we're
Yeah.
used to
We're
this.
socialized that way. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So men are socialized, from evolutionary perspective, their brains are very different than
Yeah.
ours. They've been operated, they operate very independently without without thinking about
Yeah.
like
Well, they
everybody
fall down
else.
as a boy and somebody says, rub some dirt on it. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It means I learned I can't talk to you about it. So I just
Yes.
keep going.
And
Still
then when they're
hurts.
finally talked to, they're usually in trouble. So
Yes.
I tell my couples that while we're in therapy, don't have any heavy conversations face to face. I'm like, go for a walk. That movement of that bilateral stimulation of your arms and legs helps bring your left side of your brain back online, which is where we get logic and reason from. And that's the first thing that goes offline when we're
That's
trying.
interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting because what I do is I will ask them to start their conversations and if you notice your eyes are darting away and I'll say start with holding hands. And when your hands start when you feel you want to pull away, that's usually the time to stop talking. So
Yes.
you start with let's start teaching our body how to be present with one another.
Yes. So I teach them to go for a walk together. And I also talked
Okay,
about being a porcupine or being a possum, right? Like
right.
which one of you is being the porcupine and all of a sudden your quills are throwing and which one is being the possum. And when your quills start coming out, it starts to play dead. So,
Oh, I
we
like
have
that
this.
analogy.
Yeah, so it's like possum, the possum will like
It's
totally check
passive.
out, go into, flight, just
Yep.
freeze up completely. And there's nothing healthy there.
Yeah.
Nothing productive will come. But when that person freezes up, the porcupine will just keep throwing their quills out
Right.
and it makes the possum even shut down even more. So I tell people like that thing too, like when you start to feel like you don't like your person or you don't want to touch them at this point, that is a good indicator that maybe
Time to
things
stop
are
talking.
going a little too far. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I tell
absolutely.
people because the ones that come into my office have learned to be so hyper aroused in reading micro expressions, tone of voice, the those little minute facial
Yeah.
expressions. So
Yeah.
not, when you're first in therapy, before you learn the skills, if you want to talk, cook together, talk side by side behind a closed door, back to back,
Mhm.
go for a walk. That's the most
Yeah.
productive
Well, and
because
if you
yeah, because you can't.
picking up on those micro expressions, that goes back to infancy. When we don't
Yes.
understand how language works, our brain picks up on facial cues and we can determine fear as an infant by seeing our mothers, our caregivers with fear. But there's the world is so much more complex as we become adults. And if we don't learn
Yeah.
to listen to our partner, we just say, I see this look on your face, then we don't see what underlies it. But we also don't help our partner change their facial expressions to align with their feelings.
Yeah. Well, and the pre-verbal trauma, right? All that trauma we
Yeah.
experienced before we had words to describe it
Yeah.
really impacts a lot of what happens in your adulthood.
Yeah.
You don't know why your partner's upsetting you. Something is upsetting you with them, and you
Yeah.
don't even realize it's just their tone of their voice,
Yeah.
or the look on their face.
Yeah.
That.
Well,
Go ahead.
the hippocampus isn't fully developed until about the age of 4 when we start becoming more verbal. And we have, part of one of the some of the roles of the hippocampus are um, to activate memories of person, place, time, space, location, distance, context, right? And so we don't necessarily have that conscious memory of our emotional states, but our body forms emotional memories from infancy. So
Yes.
yes, that verbal trauma still is activated in adult worlds because just like we learn to tie our shoes when we're 4 or 5, and we use that network today, when we tie our shoes today, we're actually using the same network that was built when we learned how to tie our shoes. And the more we use it, the stronger it gets. So it is
Yep.
more automatic.
Yep.
So,
And if you've
yeah,
had caregivers with postpartum depression, or there was a death, or there was some kind of mental illness or a traumatic event before the age of 4, your caregivers aren't necessarily going to be in tune with you.
yeah,
And you learn, that your attachments come in there, right? So you
yes,
end up with these very insecure, anxious attachments that transfer over into
yeah.
adulthood.
Yeah, you
And
learn to predict people by who are my caregivers. And not
yep.
everybody is like our caregivers, but we don't know that. We generalize our experiences.
Yeah. Well, and as kids, we think the adults know everything around us.
Yeah,
We think they have all the answers. We think that whatever they're doing is right.
yeah,
So what happens is then we end up looking at ourselves and think, well, I must be wrong. There must be something wrong with me. I must
yes,
not be lovable. There's a problem
yeah,
with me. And that transfers over into adulthood. So now all of a sudden your partner makes a comment about like the garbage wasn't taken out. No, it's not about the garbage anymore. It's about,
yeah,
I'm a complete failure. You don't love me. I fucked up. Oh my God. And
yeah,
then if you've learned to fight, what do? You start yelling to your partner about the
yeah,
garbage, and it's never about the garbage.
yes. And there's if there's a conflict, it's because there's always two different things that people are arguing for. You could argue about the trash every single day, but for one, it could be about the amount of time it takes to get it done. And the other person, it's the amount of money it takes to fill another dumpster or buy another trash bag. So one's fighting for time, one's fighting for money, but without having communication to understand why both people feel the way they do, you don't make movement. And it's not even time or money. It's why is time or money important? Well, when
Right.
I grew up, we were poor and I don't want to be poor again. So I worry about the money. Or when I grew up, all my mom ever did was clean. And so I don't want to live that kind of life where that's all my whole focus. And so you have two people that have their own normal contextual understandings of the world. And they feel like the other person is working against them instead of understanding my partner is working for themselves, not against me. I want to understand how to also work for them and how to help them work for me
Right.
because they're
Well,
separate arguments.
right. And that's what, I love doing premarital counseling because people come in before
Yes,
things are actually an issue.
I love
And
it.
the one thing that I make sure that people do is your unspoken expectations.
Yes,
What did you view your parents? What was their roles? What do you expect of your wife now that you're getting
yes,
married? Because the minute we get married, all of a sudden expectations change. It's so
yeah,
weird. And
yes,
yeah, it's like all of a sudden you put a ring on it, and all of a sudden people are like, well, she's different. She's different. No, she's the same. He just has expectations of what a wife should be like.
yeah,
And then I'll ask her, I'm like, what did you see from your dad? How did he treat your mom? What was their relationship like? A lot of people come in and they're like, well, my parents didn't fight. And I'm like, how old were you? How old were they when you were born? They're like, oh, then they're 30s. I'm like, when did they get married? 22. I'm like, so you missed out from 22 to 30, all the problems that they had,
yeah.
all the
While
times that
they
they
were
spent.
integrating their relationship through
Yes, and how they
conflict.
learn to problem solve. So,
Yeah.
yes, it appears like they're mind readers because now they've been together for so long and you missed out on all the stuff that they did probably argue about, that they probably
Yeah.
tried to you know, almost got divorced over,
Yeah.
So oftentimes you see these people who are like, my parents never fought, they didn't resolve conflict, or they didn't have conflict. Or I'm like, well, they probably either they ignored it, they buried it in the sand, or they learned how to acknowledge it and learned how to read each other, which
Yeah.
two mind readers don't, meet together and like get married and learn how to read each other's mind. That takes a lot of
Yeah.
work.
And mind reading has happened 0 times in the history of the world. We make
Right.
guesses using the
Yes.
wiring in our own brain.
Yes.
There's 8 billion people on the planet, and all we can ever see from another person is their behavior, and that includes their words. Oh, are you kidding me? A fruit fly, and I'm not in Texas anymore. Another one. But all we can ever see from another person is their behavior, and that includes their words. But when we see them, we make our own interpretations of their intentions, their motivations, their goals, their interests, their drives, their history. But 100% of our interpretations are coming from the 100 trillion synaptic connections in our own brain, the
Yes.
100 trillion experiences stored in our brain. We see somebody else, and those interpretations are based on our own wiring from our own experiences. And the only way we know it's accurate is by having a verbal communication. Language is the clearest form of communication. And
Yes.
it's from a back and forth that includes sharing your perspective, but the other person interpreting your perspective and the sharer deciding that that person is as accurate as possible
Yeah.
to what you're sharing.
Well,
That's
and when it looks like two people are can like totally read each other, it's because they've spent years talking
yes,
to each other and saying, "Hey, what does that face? You just raised your eyebrows.
yes,
What does that mean?"
yeah,
And they're going at things with curiosity versus automatically assuming, "Oh, I fucked up."
yeah. Did I
Yeah.
share this story about Lonnie making sexy eyes at me? And I was like, why are you looking like you're mad at me? Did I share that with you?
Yes.
Yeah. I had
Yes.
no idea. 21 years of marriage. And I guess it was 20 at the time. And that was the first time I realized he can't read those faces, which is why he can't share those faces. And so from that, we've had to, you know, we've done these silly little experiments where, he is getting closer and closer to making facial expressions that look like sexy eyes. So, but if we didn't have that conversation, I might have just been like, oh, he's mad at me. So fuck it, I'm just gonna do what I'm gonna do, or I'm
Yeah.
griping at him or whatever.
Yeah. So it takes being able to be open. It takes being able to hear things that maybe you don't want to hear.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of being able to deliver things nicely,
Yes.
like to be able to like talk to your spouse in a loving, growing manner.
Yeah.
We often go at things out of, instead of curiosity with anger. And that's
Yeah.
the biggest problem that we have in couples counseling, I think, is that people assume that their partner's trying to hurt them.
Yes.
Yeah, the assumption is you're hurting my feelings, you're trying
Yeah.
to be an
Like you're
asshole.
working against me instead of for
Yes,
yourself. Yeah.
treating each other like an enemy. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing that will like drown a relationship super fast.
And so much of that, and I know we've talked about it before, so much of that is conditioned in our upbringing because, when we have adults that complain in our lives, kids don't know how the world works. We reproduce chaos in our caregivers' lives. And those caregivers just want that chaos to stop. So they're like, your room's a mess, clean it up. Your grades are bad, clean it up. And we get conditioned when anybody complains to look at ourselves as what did I do to cause the problem instead of in adulthood, it's so much more effective to hear a complaint as being about the complainer. As kids, we learn not to because parents will say things like, I'm going to tell you why it's a problem for me. And you're like, oh, okay, I don't want to understand. I just want them to shut up. So we learn not to understand a problem. We learn to avoid it. But
Exactly.
in adult relationships, complaints are about the complainer. And when we can listen to a complaint and say, tell me more about them, I want to understand them. It it does help you become more effective at solving a problem, but it's about teaching your body that it's okay to do that because we get so emotionally aligned with I'm the problem
Yes.
instead of the complaint is about the complainer. So
Yes.
just like I said, if I think this was before we hit record, if your partner kicks the neighbor, are you going to blame yourself for why they kicked the neighbor? No. But if they kick you, you're going to blame you instead of, hey, what's going on with you that you would behave that way?
Yeah.
So everybody's actions only say something about them,
But
never
think about
about
that
you.
too, right? The physical act of kicking someone is very concrete, right?
Yes.
Where everything else is so abstract.
Yes.
So the abstract of emotional abuse, of all
What
the
did
other
I do to
stuff.
get that look?
Yes, exactly. So the abstractness is we have a really hard time with things that are abstract. We don't know, it's very ambiguous, right? So
Yes.
what do we do with ambiguous situations is we go off of our past experience.
Yes.
Yes. So
Yep.
if your partner now is kicking you, you're like, what the fuck is this? I don't deserve
Yeah.
that. But now all of a sudden you're so used to people nitpicking and complaining and being emotionally abusive.
Yeah.
You've learned somewhere in your life
I'm the
to be able
problem.
in the problem. Yeah. So now your partner comes in and if you had that concrete evidence of like, well, I could leave him if I knew he was hurting me, but I don't even know if he's hurting me with these words.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing I see is that people come in and don't even realize that they're in an emotionally abusive relationship.
Yes. Yes. And if you grow up in a family where you are physically hurt, then those people often end up in relationships that are physically violent because our brain likes predictability so much that even chaos is predictable. So
Yep.
you end up in a relationship with somebody that has some familiarity to what you grew up with. You're not choosing to be in a violent relationship. You're choosing familiarity because it helps down regulate your body because even chaos is predictable.
Right.
So it is a matter, even in that situation, of teaching your body how to be aware of safety in a different way and how to avoid physical conflict or emotional conflict, emotional abuse, physical abuse, things
Yeah.
like that.
Well, and two,
So,
our central nervous system, the goal is to always predict what's going to happen next, right?
yes.
So we can predict it. It's not comfortable. It's
Yep.
familiar. Yeah.
Yep.
So what happens is we meet somebody now that goes against everything that we've ever been growing up with, right? If
Mm-hmm.
we meet somebody who all of a sudden shows us kindness and compassion and is sitting there, is very inquisitive and curious, we're like, what the fuck is wrong with this person? Why are they like this? That is
Yeah.
not normalized to us. And we
Yeah.
can't predict what's going to happen next. And our central nervous system will freak the fuck out.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And then they know consciously, like, why can't I be with somebody that's nice to me? Like, why do I always have to
Yeah.
go after the rebel?
Well, and if
And
you've learned to live like your body's at a rave, right? Let's say in fight, flight, or
yeah,
freeze, you pick somebody that matches that energy and that will keep recreating that.
yes,
Now all of a sudden you meet somebody that is like a library, the energy of a library, and you're like, I don't know what to do with that. That is too calm.
yeah, yeah. There's got to be something sinister in that. Yeah,
Right? There's bad
yeah.
intentions. I don't
It's
even like
so good.
myself this much. Why does that person like me this much?
Right. Yeah,
Yes. So we have a
exactly.
tendency to self sabotage those relationships. Those relationships are often very big green flags, right? The person's available, their words and actions match, their character is good,
Sure.
they know how to communicate. But
Are
if you've
they
never,
Ted Bundy?
right? What are their intentions? Why are they being so nice?
Yeah, they
But
must be
that
psychopathic.
wasn't normalized to us. So we do not know what to do with healthy behavior if all you've ever seen is
Yeah,
dysfunctional behavior.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I always tell people nice, don't go for nice because serial killers are nice.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
serial killers are nice until
Go
they're
for
not.
somebody that demonstrates accountability.
Ability, yes. And
Yeah. If
accountability on so many different levels, right? With
yes.
honesty, with with being able to show up and like their bark and their bite matches.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yes, choose somebody that can manage conflict without criticism, without defensiveness, right? The opposite of
Yes.
defensiveness is accountability, but it's also important to be able to address a problem, not just let things be swept under the rug. If you grow up in a household where parents didn't talk about problems, it's very normal not to talk about problems, but everybody has problems. It's healthy for couples to have conflict because there's 8 billion people on the planet. They all have 100 trillion different experiences stored in their brains. The mathematical likelihood that any two are going to be the same is zero. So you're going to be in a relationship with somebody that's different from you. You
Yes.
have to have conflict. It's not that you have it, it's how. If you have conflict that is constant fight, flight, freeze, problem solving doesn't even exist in a fight, flight, freeze brain, an avoid brain.
Yep. The first thing that
And
goes offline is communication, problem
yep,
solving, finding your words,
yep. And
all
all
those
you
things.
do in fight, flight, freeze is use what's wired into your brain beforehand. This is
Yep.
not a creative, this is not a creative problem solving brain. It's a survival brain.
Yep.
This part, when you're down regulated and you address topics from the perspective of, I really want to understand what to do differently so that you're not talking about the way it's been. You never do the dishes. Can't undo that. And it's probably a lie, anyways, if they've ever done the dishes once.
Right.
But
And never and always are two relationship killers too.
yes, absolutely. And getting rid of that absolute terminology so that you can say, I have a problem when this specific thing happens. It's not all the time, but this specific thing has become a pattern. I want to address this, but I don't want to accuse you of being the problem. I want to understand how you see the problem. And I want you to want to understand how I see the problem. So you get to some middle ground between, or even if Lonnie has a better way of doing things, I with the discussion of the term unreasonable.
I
Um,
hate that word.
yeah, once I understood his use of the term unreasonable was just a 2 on a 10
Yeah.
scale and not a 12 on a 10 scale, like I saw my dad and determined he's
Yeah. Well, we
unreasonable.
fight the semantics, not the problem, right?
Yes,
Yeah, we go off the
exactly.
owies and never are the words that are used. Now we're not even
Yeah,
fighting, we're not talking, we're not communicating
right.
over the
Yeah,
problem. We're communicating over the words that were
yes.
used.
And
Yeah.
once we got on the same page with that word, I took his way of looking at it. I'm at least a 2 on the unreasonable scale. So, but other, eventually you go one way or the other, or you get somewhere in the middle, but it's about integrating your lives. That is the most important component of having a healthy relationship, is making space for 2 people in the relationship, not just one.
Yeah.
If you think of Leave It to Beaver, that show from the 50s, black and white, mom and dad slept in separate beds because at the time, if you slept in the same bed, a lot of times you were considered sexually deviant. Well, then the 60s came along, everybody's sleeping with everybody, and now couples sleep in the same beds. And typically in our current day and age, if a couple isn't sleeping in the same bed, what do we say? They must be having problems.
Yes.
But that's not necessarily true. Sometimes couples sleep better when they decide, for the 2 people in the relationship, that we're going to sleep in separate beds and we are healthier because of that. But if you stay sleeping in the same bed and it continues the conflict because you worry about the meaning, or what the neighbors are going to say, or what your
Mm-hmm.
parents are going to say, then really what you're doing is you're creating a relationship that has you 2 in mind plus everybody else, instead of just design it
Yeah.
according to the 2
Well,
people that
and
are
the
in it.
resentment that builds, right? Now, all of a sudden,
Yes.
you're pissed at your partner because
Yeah,
they're
we have to do it this way
snoring.
because you're mom.
Yeah, they're hogging the bed, they're snoring. You're not getting enough sleep either, and that creates
Yes.
problems. And now you're like so worried because now your husband says or your wife says, we have to do this. And they're
Yeah.
going off of everything that they've ever learned. And you've learned that it's okay to
Yeah.
sleep wherever we want as long as we go to bed together. And like, we don't have to stay in bed together. We can go to bed together, have these
Right.
nighttime routines. And a lot of the things that we need to talk about is routines, right? What kind of connection routines do people have?
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't have to sleep in the
Yeah.
bed, but go to bed
Yeah.
together, have a
Gottman called
moment.
those rituals for connection.
Yes. Yeah.
the
Our
the
ritual
things that help
connections.
you define who are we as a couple.
Yeah. How
We
do you
we
leave each
snuggle in
other?
bed.
Yeah. How do you leave each other? How do you guys reconnect? How many times a day do you
Yeah.
guys touch each other? I mean, what does the research say, and how many meaningful touches do we need
Right.
throughout the day?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they say that too, that like men take like 30 seconds longer to feel oxytocin when they're actually being touched. So when we're making those meaningful attempts to connect with our spouse, a male partner, we have to hug them a little bit
Yeah.
longer.
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting because that also leads to another necessary component of um, addressing conflict in relationships, is the hormone side. Because a woman may avoid touching her husband because, oh, it's going to lead to sex, and
Yes.
their interpretation of sex is, it's too emotionally draining. I don't have time, lots of different things. But oftentimes males get perpetuated in society as if they're Neanderthals and
Mm-hmm.
all they want to do is have sex. Well, hormonally, males have a testosterone level between 250 and 1100, depending on what laboratory you go to. But that testosterone for a male regulates their emotion, their mood, their
Yes.
libido, their strength, their endurance, their sleep. So much of that is regulated by one hormone. And if you look at it animalistically, humans are animals. If you see a buck out in a field going doe after doe after doe, you don't look after that. You look at that buck and say, he's such an animal. But if a man is like, interested in sex all the time, we think of him like he's some kind of animal instead of he does have a biological drive that's different from women.
Yes.
Women's typical hormone level is 100 or less. So they don't have that same automatic drive to populate the earth, but they do have hormones that regulate their sexual interest. Ox- uh, uh, Testosterone is one of them, estrogen or estradiol, and progesterone. And without regulating those, plus dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all of those other components, if those are not regulated, women often don't have the same level of sex drive. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean they don't care about their partner. It is a matter of getting to some middle ground between what works for one person and what works for another, and get rid of this whole idea that women are not sexual or that men are just animals. There's a lot of things that we can do hormonally, males and females. If males have a low sex drive and a wife wants to have more sex, sometimes he's got low testosterone and he needs testosterone replacement, and that helps enhance the health of the relationship. Women, the same thing. If those hormones are not regulated, and often across the menstrual cycle, you know, birth control plays into that,
Yes.
fear about getting pregnant, so much goes into that situation when it comes to people's sex lives. If we're not educated about, hey, this might be something, you go to your doctor and you have your hormones evaluated first. That's one part, is making that recommendation to them to have that evaluated. But who are we referring them to? Oftentimes we're referring them to somebody who's been in practice for 30 years and doesn't even connect to the reality that there's a lot of information about hormones that you don't have as a family practitioner or an modern OBGYN. So you don't even monitor all the hormones that need to be monitored in order to regulate hormones. So I tend to recommend you go to a hormone specialist, not just your family doctor, because there's so much new information and there's a lot more research on women, which was not conducted for
Yes.
years and years.
And if it was conducted, it was on a small population, a small portion. It wasn't a
Absolutely.
very big portion of people
Right,
that it
which
was
is
tested
not
on.
statistically sound information.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
you have to
Well,
go to somebody who
and the bad
does.
thing about that is too, is the insurance often doesn't cover the hormone specialists.
Right.
So we're stuck paying out of pocket. If our
Yeah.
insurance companies would hop on board, and like go with like, let's look at our hormones, let's look at the root cause of this problem instead of saying, oh, well, yeah, here's some birth control, or, they give the men automatically, they give them Viagra instead of looking at, what are your levels? Let's see what we can do to improve those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So doing your research so that you're making informed decisions that are updated with current information, not just, oh, you're a female, if you're not going to be interested, go home and go
Yeah.
to bed. And
Somebody compiled a list of doctors, and it's floating around the internet, that doctors that actually test hormone levels, that treat the hormone levels, that actually take
oh, really?
insurance. Yeah, and
Find that.
they also compiled a list of doctors that will actually give women hysterectomies, no matter what age they are. If they ask for it, they don't sit there and tell them, well, what
That's
about your
awesome.
future husband? Or we need your husband's like permission. So this person they asked everyone around the country to add names to this list so that way that people could have informed decisions to make.
Let's find that because we'll
Yes.
link it in the
I wish I
YouTube
would have
page.
saved the link, but somebody posted it a couple of weeks ago on one of my women's groups that I was on.
I'm going to write
And
myself a note.
yeah, but they did all this research and they keep asking people, add if your doctor does these things, if they take insurance, if they charge like a sliding scale. So it's really a great source of information for us to like be able to look out for our own physical sexual health.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it need that?
Yeah. And you think about too, though, like with sex, right? Women need our emotional needs met. Men can like the wind can blow and get a hard on, right? Women, we need our emotional
As long
needs
as
to
our
be met.
testosterone's regulated.
Right. So our brain, our heart, and our vagina all have to like coexist together. And
Yeah.
a lot of the times, the woman is carrying the invisible load,
Yeah.
doctor's appointments, things, we're planning like for appointments and all the shit that goes on in our head, right? Like what happens next? Or why is there a load of dishes in the
Yeah.
dishwasher? And, men don't pay attention to those things oftentimes.
Yeah.
And, we go to bed and lay down and we're exhausted. The mental exhaustion is real. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden the man is like, hey, and we're like,
Yeah.
no, I don't have any energy for it.
Yeah.
So we have to remember foreplay starts at the beginning of the day, not
Yeah.
just right before
Well,
sex.
women's sex organ is their brain. When you
Yes.
meet their emotional needs, that's when less adrenaline and cortisol are produced, more dopamine, which is the only thing that motivates us to take
Yes.
action. So,
So all you people out there who are like with a relationship with a woman, if she's
yeah,
not having sex, find out what she needs more of.
yeah,
Ask, be curious, ask, how can I
yeah,
help you more? What do you need more of? How can I support you by speaking your language?
yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
not to forget men, when a man's hormones, testosterone is not regulated, if it's too high, it becomes estrogen. And
Yes.
they can often become emotional, whether that's anger or tears. So
Well, they can become
it can
lethargic too. They're just apathetic.
yes,
Yes.
yes, it
No
can
motivation.
it can be outside of that person's range. So each individual really needs to know their range. And I honestly think it should be so much easier to monitor hormone levels, from my husband had testicular cancer, so he doesn't have any testicles. So he has to have testosterone. And there's so few specialists that know anything about that and how to regulate that. So we'll go to a doctor and the doctor says, oh, no, you only need to monitor this. No, you don't understand. He doesn't produce any on his own. So, they can make things very difficult for him to get testosterone. It's a controlled substance. And we travel. So moving state to state can be very difficult, but he doesn't produce it on his own. So, if you're not educated about how to take care of your body, it's very easy just to take somebody else's perspective that doesn't know anything about you and feel like you're hitting a roadblock and not improving things in your life that you want to.
Yeah.
So just like, you wouldn't go to a doctor who didn't fix, or a surgeon that didn't fix your broken leg. You go to somebody and find someone to fix it. All of these
Yes.
things are the same. Don't stop looking, whether it's a therapist or a hormone specialist or a family doctor. Find one that works for you. Find one that you
Yeah.
feel listens to you and that you connect with, because that
Yeah.
relationship matters just as much as the relationship you're in other areas of your
Yeah.
life.
Well, and I think that's so important. Our biological health affects our mental health, which affects our
Absolutely.
relationships.
Yeah.
I remember after I gave birth to my second child, this child would not sleep. He cried 20 hours a day, cried and vomited. And I had postpartum depression, did not know it. I was angry. I was irritable. I remember calling my partner up and saying, I need you to come home. And he's like, I can't. I said, then never come home again. And I hung up. And like 10 minutes later, he shows up at the door and I'm like, I thought you couldn't come home. Get the fuck out of here. I'm like, no, wait, I'm getting the fuck out of here. And I grab my stuff. I go in my minivan and I'm parked down the street for like 7 hours. I'm just sitting in my minivan. And he calls me and he's like, are you ever going to come home? And I'm like, I don't know. But he sat there for so long telling that story about how mean I was. But never
Mhm.
once did anyone, everyone saw this around me too, that I was not okay.
Yeah.
And
What are
I
you
think
going through?
right. Nobody, everyone's just like, oh, well, yeah. So
She
finally,
lost
one
it.
day, she lost her mind. Yeah. So one day, my friend was talking to me and she's like, I really think that you might have postpartum depression. And I'm just like, I don't want to kill my child. And she's like, no, no, no. Postpartum depression can be like a mood change. It can be like just feeling off, irritable, whatever. And the minute I got that
Postpartum depression
fixed,
is different than postpartum psychosis.
yes, but I think we hear about so much about postpartum
Yeah.
depression and people going off the deep end that we don't know that when our spouse is just acting different after birth, birth or
Yeah.
after an event, it can be
Yeah.
biological.
And
So
oftentimes you don't want to say that you feel that way because you don't want people to think I'm going to kill my baby.
yes. Well, I remember I
Shouldn't
lived
say
in
anything.
Hawaii at the time and we didn't have air conditioning. And I would go in my bathroom, close the door, and I'd be like, I fucking hate this kid. Why won't this baby stop crying? And I'd go outside and my neighbors are like, give me your baby. And I'm
Yeah.
like, why? They're like, we can hear you. And I'm like, I'm not going to kill my baby. I just needed to vent. But
Yes.
nobody around me for months. I think it was finally, I think 18 months after giving birth, someone finally said something to me about maybe you need help. But I
Wow.
swear my partner probably thought I was nuts. I was
Yeah.
not nice. I would lash out. It was not pretty. And
Yeah.
I knew something was wrong, but I'm like, nobody pointed it out. So I thought, well, maybe this is what you're supposed to feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that leads us into the conversation about parenting that, kids are not born with instructions and all we have is what's wired into our head before then.
Yes.
So most of it's very just automatic under stress. And
Yes.
there's no there's no moment on an adult's 18th birthday or your parents um the day that you're born where all the answers fall into their head. And adults go through transitions in life just like kids go through transitions. Kids, they're
Yes.
infants, they're toddlers, they're in elementary school, college, and every one of those transitions is an adult now being a parent of an infant, a parent of a toddler, a parent of an
Yes. But
elementary
also a
school.
partner at the same time, right?
Yes,
And if you've
absolutely. And
been
an
emotional,
individual.
yes. And if you've had trauma, any of those developmental periods, what happens? The
Yeah,
minute your kids start going through those developmental things, you start becoming
yours.
emotionally
Yeah,
stunted and you'll start to see qualities in your partner that you do not like.
yeah,
You're like, who the hell are you? And where did this
yeah,
come from? And why are you losing your shit?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you learn premarital counseling, when you learn to prepare yourself for those things ahead of time, it does make it easier to have wiring in your head that you can use when you get to those fight, flight, freeze interactions instead of just trying to wing it. If you're floating in a perfect temperature pool of water and I say to you, do this simple math, 3 + 4 + 6, that's simple. You can do it. Your brain is in the position to do it. You're comfortable, you're safe.
Yep.
But if you're floating in a shark tank and I say to you, do this simple math, 3 + 4 + 6, your brain doesn't hear the numbers, let alone be able to put them
Yeah.
together.
And
So,
I tell my couples that if you can't do simple math, you should not be having a conversation in this
yes,
moment. If you
yes,
cannot put
exactly.
one and one together in this moment, that is a sign that
Yes.
you are not in the present.
Yep. We don't learn in a shark tank. We have to get out of the shark
Shark
tank
Tank.
so that we can start learning what is it my partner is trying to tell me? Because they might say it's so simple, but if you're in a shark tank, it's not simple. So,
Well, state dependent learning, right? We
yep,
learn in the state that we're at, we remember it in that
yep,
state, right? So if you've
yeah,
learned a simple problem is now a Shark Tank problem, you don't know what
yep,
to do. You're just going to panic and you're going to
yeah,
drown and you're going to get
yep.
eaten alive.
Yep, exactly. And that's what it feels like. That's where that fight, flight, freeze comes from
Yeah.
in conflict. So so often I work with couples and they slam the door on their partner, but the whole reason they're having conflict is because they want to be on the other side of the door with their partner. They have to learn, don't slam the door. What do we do to make sure you're both able to come together and be curious about the other person's
Yeah.
perspective, but
Well, all those
understand
are
the problem before you
attempts
try
to
to solve it?
connect, right?
Yes.
Like we've learned really this dysfunctional patterns that we've learned, those attempts to connect, we've learned from childhood. If
Yeah.
we couldn't get love from a parent, we've learned to have to do weird things
Yeah.
or dysfunctional things to get that attention. And
Yeah.
bad attention is better than, no attention at all. So we
Yeah.
get into relationships and we get into parenting and what happens? The
Yeah.
same patterns replay themselves.
Yeah.
And the goal
Well,
is always to resolve what we've always experienced. We hope at one point our partner will be able to see through it and say, hey, I hear you. I see you. I get you. And I'm not going to get angry and I'm going to support you right now. And I'm going to lift you up and give you everything you've always wanted.
yeah. And in a relationship, it's not dyadic. It's not just between two people because you will definitely see, mom and dad fight and this kid's being a brat And the purpose of his brattiness is the function for the dysfunction, which is to
Yes.
distract mom and dad from fighting, because that's how that kid saves the family from divorce or more conflict. And so as a therapist, if I work with that kid and help fix that problem, mom and dad may argue more. So then that problem becomes the next kid's behavior.
Yep.
And so then, because that kid's behavior is not the problem, it's mom and dad fighting. So generally, you have to work with mom and dad first in order to get them to understand their own contributions to those problems.
Yes. And oftentimes mom and dad are like, nope, nope, it's the kid. The kid's the problem.
Yep.
We're not the problem.
Yep.
And it's really having to go through and breaking generational patterns and years
Yes.
and generations of all these ways of parenting and communicating.
Yeah.
And that to me is, parents are having a harder time breaking that than it is in couples.
Yes.
I find that in couples, it's easier to break the generational patterns than it is in families. Yeah. Because all of a sudden now you've got so many kids, and how many actually people are in this relationship, in this family? It's not just the immediate family members. Well, it's all of your like ancestors that pass that shit
they
down.
Come in with this idea that there's a hierarchy. You need to respect your parents, but without understanding you do contribute to problems for your kids.
Yes.
And if you don't understand how they interpret a problem, you can't integrate your lives, and it's not going to be a close relationship.
Yeah. So I always tell my parents that call about kids, I'm like, I'll see your kid, but I have to see you guys separately and together. I said, I have to work on your individual stuff because your individual stuff's getting in the way, your relationship's getting in the way, and your child is the one that is now on fire. But you guys are refusing to acknowledge.
Yes. It's just like treating pneumonia. If you go to the doctor with a cough and you have pneumonia and they give you cough syrup, you're not addressing the problem, whether it's viral or bacterial. The whole system is a problem. So you have to treat the whole system, not the loudest symptom.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, this kid that's behaving badly might be the loudest symptom, but it's not the whole problem. So, and when you have two parents that are like, it's not me, it's him. What are you seeing? Two parents demonstrating a lack of accountability. So the kid's not going to learn to be accountable, and nothing improves. You have to, again, go back to, how do we build some accountability here?
Yes. So in your relationship, if you can't, you need to work on that shit before you have children. That is the most important thing. Don't wait until your house is on fire. Yeah. I always tell people, I'm like, if you go on a cruise, do they wait until the ship is sinking to like teach you what to do? No, you'd be freaking the fuck out. Right. There's always the stuff before you even leave the port because they want you.
Yeah, there's still also going to be things that you can never be prepared for.
Right. But the emergency escape plans, right? Like they have it in the hotel door, right? If you didn't know where to go, you'd freak out. So there's a sign. So I tell couples, I'm like, create an emergency escape plan. When you see your partner shutting down, when you see that there's something going on, here's some questions you can ask. Here's some things that you can do. But what happens is that left side of our brain goes offline and we don't know what to do. So we go into panic mode. And that's why it's so important to have that emergency escape plan for your relationship.
And the ship sinking is only a symptom of the problem.
Exactly.
What caused the sinking? Yeah, absolutely. You have to understand a problem before you try to solve it. But absolutely, wire some stuff in there before you need it, so that when you go into fight, flight, freeze, you have something you can do.
Yeah. So know your blind spots, know the things that trigger you, know the words, the phrases, the shit that shuts you down. Let your partner know. So that way, when all of a sudden they keep talking and you get quiet, they know that your quietness means you've shut down. Yeah.
And that's the value of having a therapist.
Yes.
And I think a family therapist, especially when you have relationship issues, because a typical mental health provider is not trained to look at situations without bias. Yes. And a family therapist is just run through the ringer in their training to make sure that they're looking at things from all angles and not picking sides, and understanding that both people are normal within the context of their own lives, but normal isn't always effective. When you have a therapist that will give you unbiased information And which is different from a family member or a friend who may have their own agenda, their own reason for wanting you to
Yeah.
do
And
what
be
you
careful who you take advice from because they're going off their
absolutely,
shit. Yeah. And are they living their life
absolutely.
bravely and courageously? And are they healthy themselves?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So having a therapist that's removed from your whole family situation and doesn't have bias and helps, play devil's advocate when necessary, um, challenges you effectively to be accountable. That's
Yeah.
going to help you have the most accurate information so that you can change your normal to what's more effective, not just normal.
Yeah.
Because it's normal
one
is
of the,
easy.
one of the things that I do in my intakes is I do this individually, I do it as families, I do it as a couple, as I have them draw their family growing up as animals. And because I tell people, I'm like, tell me about your family. They're like, oh, it was normal, right? So when I have people draw
Everyone's
animals, what happens is that I get to see how the animals interacted together.
okay.
I like to see how big they draw the animals to or how small and where they are in the placement because you can see a lot of the family dynamic and the animals they drew. Are they different like creatures? Are they different like, are they different like mammals or, are they
Oh,
all the
interesting.
same? Yeah. I like to see, where they place it. Or is the mom here, the dad here, and the kids are in the middle? Is dad up here and the kids and family are down here? So I like to look
Interesting.
at like, how did the cow interact with the moose? What happened when the moose would get angry and, start to like butt everybody with its antlers? What did now the little puppy do? So I like to look at, what did you learn growing up with
Mhm.
communication, with interactions? And then I have them draw you guys now as animals, you and your partner, you and your family now. And I like to see, have you morphed? Are you the same animal? Are you, now doing the same dynamics with your spouse, your partner
Oh,
that you
cool.
did with your family growing up? So I
I
get,
think that's interesting because that's something that I would use um, to address their trauma. If dad is a bear, how
yes,
do I get them to interact differently with emotionally with dad so
yes,
that they recognize as an adult, I'm safe, I can't be hurt by this person anymore. So now that you're an adult, what if we make him a koala?
yes,
And the
exactly.
feeling with a
Yep.
koala changes when you change
Yeah.
the black bear or the grizzly bear, so
Yes.
that person's body is learning to feel differently so that
Yes. That's
they can
exactly what
go
I
into those
do.
interactions differently.
It's exactly what I did. I like to explore
Awesome.
like what made your dad a grizzly bear? What was his trauma? What was his
Yes.
dad? Yeah.
Yes.
So I look at the generational patterns there and then I look at, okay, so now as an adult, you are no longer a puppy. You are now a black bear, and as a black bear, if your dad's still a grizzly bear, what are your protective factors? How
Yeah.
can you deal with a grizzly bear?
Yeah.
If a black bear goes at a grizzly bear, what happens?
Yeah.
The grizzly bear
And
is going to attack. Yeah.
that's why the family therapy component, family systems component is so important because it keeps you from throwing family members under the bus. And
Yes.
instead of understanding every one of those people is a product of their own interpretations of the world, their
Yes.
own experiences. So they're normal within the context of their own lives too. Doesn't mean no
Yes.
one's effective. So if everyone's goal is just to be more effective and understand how you interact can be changed
Yeah.
and you can learn how to be emotionally out of the shark tank so that you can learn new ways of interacting,
Yeah.
then you can absolutely build peace for yourselves and your life and healthier relationships. So all of that is critical to understanding um, somebody's history and how it drives them towards effective future
Yeah.
intervention.
And we have to remember normal and healthy are two different things because normal is
Correct.
very relative and the
Yep.
context that you grew up with and that you're
Yeah.
in versus
Yeah.
healthy is, yes, your family may be normal, but were they healthy? Two
Right.
different,
Yeah.
very
How
different
effective
things.
are they? Yeah.
Yes, yes. And my
Absolutely.
animal thing, because I'm a play therapist. So I'm a family therapist and a play therapist. So I take a lot of my things that I use with little kids with the adults because what happens is as adults, we're all emotionally
Yeah.
stunted
Yeah.
as children at the age that we were traumatized.
The majority of the wiring in our brain as adults was put there by us when we're kids. Our
Yes.
experiences, 3-year-olds have the most neurons available in their brain
Yes.
to connect and make experiences. They're little sponges. So,
Yes.
and we use that wiring until we change it. So, yeah,
Yes.
you have to go back. You have to look at people as not adults, but grown up kids.
Yeah.
The
And when I
wiring
use
still
those
exists.
techniques, I find that their defenses go down. Because when I say, tell me about your parents, they'll tell me, oh, it was great. But then when I say, tell me about the moose and the grizzly bear, well, the moose drank a lot and the grizzly bear was very abusive, you know?
Right.
So I learn a lot more that way. And one thing I also do is I have couples build a house together because you can, with blocks. So you can see a lot in their dynamic and how they build things together. You know, is one
Yeah.
sitting back? Is one talking? Is one doing all the work? Is one just saying, fuck it because you're being too bossy? So I
Mm-hmm.
love to see the family dynamic within building that house to
Yeah.
see, what do we
How
need to
they
work
accept
on?
influence from one another or
Yes.
not. Yeah.
And what they build too. Are you building two
Yep.
separate houses?
Right.
Are you in the same house but
Yeah.
building two separate areas?
And are you good
Yeah.
with that? Is that where you
Yeah.
want to be? Yeah.
Yeah. And then what
Good.
I'll do is I'll change the dynamic too. When I'm doing this with families, I'll tell, okay, kids, you do it now. You take over. Now, mom and dad, I want you to work together to get the power back to like tell the kids what to do. And when I see couples having issues doing it with just couples and no kids, I'll tell like the husband, I'm like, okay, husband, I want you to step up. Woman, you step down, and not woman, but wife, you step down. And I want you to, I just want to see how the dynamic changes to
Yeah.
see what happens to their bodies when all of a sudden one takes the power and the other one steps down. You can see a lot in
Absolutely.
how their body changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So,
awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
there's one that Gottman used in one of his training programs or uses in their training program, and it's um uh you're you're isolated on an island or you leave in a boat. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've used it. I stopped using it. But the couple has to decide what items they're taking with them to the island in order to try to save themselves. And I stopped using it because oftentimes because it was an outdoorsy thing, the males ended up taking over and the women would often let them. But that's often a role dynamic. My husband
Yes.
mows the lawn, I don't mow the lawn, so I'll let him decide what we're taking.
Yes.
So, but if it's inside and you're saving yourself from your kids and who's going to do the laundry and pack the backpacks and
Yeah.
change the diapers, it would be a different thing too.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the question too, like if you're going on vacation, who would take over that, right? Usually
yep,
the woman does, right?
yep, yeah,
Yeah. So with the
yeah,
outdoor stuff, it's the man, the vacation stuff, it's the woman. So it changes in every different context.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I think what we should do is let's pick up on parenting next week
Sounds good.
and we'll just keep going in that direction because I think there's a lot of parenting programs out there, and I think it's a good discussion for us to have what we recommend and why we recommend it, and
That
different
sounds perfect.
components of healthy parenting, not perfect
Yes.
parenting, but healthy parenting.
Yes, yes. There is no
Yeah,
perfect. Perfect is a context, a construct
exactly.
that was developed to drive us mad and crazy and
Yes, there
make
is
us
no
anxious.
such thing as a perfect parent.
Yeah, there's no
Absolutely.
such thing as perfect anything. Nothing
Yeah,
is perfect. So for
exactly.
all you out there that think that you want to be perfect, no, perfect is just
Yeah.
going to drive you mad.
Yep. Just
Yeah.
prepare yourself. You are going to fuck up your kid.
Yes, you
There's
are.
no kid that
But
gets out of
being
childhood
aware
without
of it,
baggage.
yeah, being
Yes.
aware of your shit is so
Yes.
important.
Absolutely. Your baggage becomes
Yes.
your kid's baggage. So
Yes.
absolutely. We'll see
Yeah.
you next week, everybody.
See you next week, guys. Have a great week.